Excellent. Okay, well, howdy, partner.
Howdy.
Episode 3.
3 already?
3 already, and we're going to be looking at Tintin in America.
Nice.
It is, and for me it feels like the first proper Tintin book from childhood, the first one I was really aware of.
Yeah, it's very strong, isn't it? It's when you're reading Soviets and Congo, you're very aware that they're sort of the finding of the Tintin thing. He was finding the character. And with Tintin in America, it's like this is the first complete book where you're like, this is a storybook about his adventures in America. There are elements of the first two in it. Obviously, he gets beaten up a lot. He gets kidnapped. It's a bit like the Land of the Soviets. He gets kidnapped. He falls through trapdoors. He gets hit by things. He chases cars, all that stuff. But it's got a drive to it, and it's sort of quite unified in its style, and it's got a beginning, middle, and an end, like a proper story.
It does. And I didn't really read much at a young age. I kind of got read to when I was a child, and then sort of stopped. And it wasn't really until my mid-teens that I started reading properly again. So Tintin was really I suppose, that jumping off point again back into reading. And one thing that struck me about Tintin in America is there's actually a lot of text in there. It's like probably for me at kind of a young age, it was like reading War and Peace or something. It is pretty wordy.
Yeah, there's lots of dialogue. So in fact, on the first page, when Capone is briefing his henchmen, it's like the words hardly fit in the bubble. So many words, and it goes all the way down to the bottom. You're like, right, you guys, listen good. Tintin, the reporter, is doing it. It's like it's straight into it, and then within like 9 panels, he's been kidnapped.
Shall I give a bit of the usual historic guff?
Yeah. That would be super, Guff.
Okay, so you may remember last time we left Tintin on his return from the Congo after another successful mission, and Hergé and his boss, the Abbot Valet, they've organised another big homecoming celebration for Tintin and Snowy at the Gare du Nord in Brussels, and this time they've also organised a second event in the east of Belgium in Liège. And they've invited 10 Congolese people, and they've invited a troupe of animals borrowed from a circus. And yes, apparently it nearly turns into some kind of riot. But it's genuinely the book, despite the racist overtones and the animal cruelty, it's seen as being a huge success for Hergé. And again, they have copies of the book printed and ready to go at this event. And Hergé's boss, Valet, couldn't be happier. In fact, he increases Hergé's salary from 600 francs a week to 2,000 francs a week.
Whoa.
And Hergé he's only 24 still. He's living at home in the attic room with his parents still.
Yeah.
He's got this girlfriend, Germaine Kikins, and she's starting to think that Hergé might be marriage material. He's starting to exhibit some of his artwork at local galleries. He's starting to get interviews with magazines about his cartoon work. So things are going well there. And due to the success of Tintin in the Congo, Hergé is now given a free hand, and he's told he can take Tintin wherever he likes for this new book. And obviously Hergé has had it in his mind to take Tintin to America for a while. Hergé is maturing, and he's determined to make this book a slightly more high quality affair than the previous two. Better researched, more accurate, more detailed. So he actually does quite a lot of research on this one.
Yeah, he looks into the history of Native Americans and the different tribes and so forth. And I think something I read was that the headdress that the chief's wearing on the cover is actually not considered. They're the Blackfoot tribe actually wore headdresses, so it was correct. It wasn't like a cliche. I mean, obviously he wanted to have a Native American, or as they're called now offensively in the book, Red Indians, which is
Yes.
of the time. That is actually correct for the Blackfoot tribe, apparently. So it's a great cover as well. You're like, oh, he's gone into and then this was the 30s, wasn't it, when he first wrote it? So
It was serialized, I think, between September 31 and October 32.
yeah, so cowboys and Indians would be very popular then, and this was a sort of continuation of that. Um, but also it's a progressive, it's more progressive than that when you actually get into it. It's less um jingoistic about America. Obviously, Hergé's speaking from a Belgian point of view, so he's not American, so he can criticize America as well as, in fact, I mean, we'll talk about. I'm sure you know which bit I mean. It's the bit where they discover oil. I mean, that's just so well done. um,
There's a few things that make it really contrast with Tintin in the Congo. I mean, first of all, I don't think any animals were harmed in the making of the book,
no, I don't think so. No, there's a lot of animals in it, but no.
unlike Tintin in the Congo. And
Only Harry gets kicked by someone, but it's a bad guy, so we hate him for that.
absolutely, it's a character expose. And Hergé is also very sensitive to the plight of the Native Americans and, in fact, the African Americans as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
And in fact, he writes actually in the Petit Vingtième, before the serialization of Tintin in America starts, Hergé announces that Tintin is going to go to America. So there starts to be actually correspondence between his readers and Hergé before the serialization even starts. And there's this really fascinating piece that's published, which is Hergé writing a dialogue almost between Tintin and Snowy, and it's Tintin explaining to Snowy how Black Americans are treated at the time, and he's writing there. Tintin saying to Snowy in this clipping, it's bizarre. Um, Americans don't like the blacks. There are millions of them. They're treated very badly, and they're descendants of former slaves. So the whites think they're very superior, which is not true because the slave is always far more valuable than his master. And it goes on like this. And this is sort of I suppose educational piece in the magazine before the story starts. So just like setting out the scene, really.
Yeah, and if you think about, the civil rights movement and the way in America, even in the 50s, the N word was used quite regularly, and black people were coming out of that. It became more and more shocking for black people to be treated like that, even in the 50s and 60s when it all sort of blew up. And they had the sort of the Watts riots and stuff like that. This is 30 years before all of that. If Hergé is talking about black rights back in
Yeah.
the 30s, he's obviously progressing with the times. He's aware of what's going on. He's aware of it. And same with the Native Americans. Throughout this book, it's constantly saying these people were here before the white man. They are the people that were here. It's their land. Hergé very clearly points out that this is their visitors. Tintin's a visitor to America, and white Americans are immigrants. It's all in that. It's all in there. I mean, there is some slightly, like Tintin in the Congo, the Native Americans are portrayed as a bit gullible and and just fighting amongst each other and stuff. But that's sort of, it's not as bad. It is more progressive. And at this point in time, it was progressive to say they're more than cowboys and Indians. These are people.
Well, I mean, he has Hergé. He has his background in the scouting movement, of course. So he's quite interested in living on the land in terms of that background. But he's also seems to have been influenced by the silent film era. Obviously, he's a big fan growing up of the silent films, many of which are Western, very popular in the 1920s. And he's also been quite influenced, apparently, by this book called Scènes de la vie future, which is apparently quite critical of American lifestyle and modernization,
Yeah,
mechanization, mass marketing and things. So he's not been to America. He's not going to go to America for another 40 years. He goes in
Really?
1971. But he has done his research.
Yeah, and it is. He is aware that Tintin is a tourist because he does rush around doing all these touristy things. You know, he's like, oh, I'm going to go see. I'm going to go to Chicago, and Al Capone is there. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to go to the Midwest. Then I'm going to do all this. So he is a tourist, and it is sort of pleasing the tourists. The people who are interested in looking at different parts of America, and that is, it's like, again, it's like an Indiana Jones thing. He's a globetrotter. So if Tintin goes to America, you're going to want to see Tintin in different parts of America. And I think it starts very well with the whole Prohibition setup and Capone. And because I think I read that Capone, it's the first time you've seen his face in a Tintin book. He was in Congo, mentioned in Congo, but you didn't see his face. And then and also later on, they put the scar on his face because Capone was in prison by then for his crimes. So Hergé and the paper weren't afraid of Capone coming back at them and going, how dare you portray me like this?
I've heard actually, and I'm not sure if this is true, but that Al Capone is the only real life figure ever to be used as a character in a Tintin book, using their real name. I'm not sure if that's true. Maybe someone will write in and tell us that we're
I
wrong.
think there's two.
Is there?
I'm sure I read that he is one of only two
Okay.
characters. Don't know what the other one is at this stage.
We'll look out for that in the next 21 books. But I think
Gandhi
that
at some point, or
yeah, maybe.
I don't think
Um, I've heard that the book was originally going to be called Adventures of Tintin Reporter in Chicago, but obviously about a third of the book is set in the Wild West, and about a third of the book is set in the prairies. So he
yeah,
obviously decided that Tintin should travel a bit further and wider than that.
yeah, and I do love the Chicago stuff. It's the first third of the book, really, isn't it? He gets like a pair of they drug him, they gas him and throw him in the ocean. All that stuff. It's very gangstery stuff. It's brilliant.
It's a real genre piece. It's to get gangsters with violin cases and
Oh yeah, it's
being
proper.
tied to railway lines and all that stuff.
You can imagine Edward G. Robinson popping up and going, "Now look, Tintin, don't mess with me. You hear? It's that kind of stuff. Come on, Muggsy, let's get Tintin." It's very, but that's what I love about it. It's incredibly the Untouchables. It's a great world everyone knows about. Everyone knows Capone and Prohibition, and even if you don't, it's a fun. It's like it's showing that the American civilized society are just as warlike and corrupt as anybody who just starts a war at any point. And he makes fun of the gangsters in the same way that he makes fun of the Native Americans. Really, they're all infighting and messing up jobs and
Yeah.
a lot of slapstick again. Like sort of Harold Lloyd. It reminded me a bit of Harold. There's a couple of Harold Lloyd movies and chapters.
Yeah, I was going to say that one of my favorite frames in the whole of the book is the kind of
Oh, yeah.
vertiginous thing where he's climbing from one window ledge to another in this kind of big old, tall brownstone. And that's kind of straight out of Safety Last, isn't it?
Safety Last, and also later North by Northwest kind of used that. I think I bought you a mouse pad once that had that image on it.
Yeah, I've still got that. Yeah, it's
It's
falling
so
apart,
good.
but I do.
Yeah, I bet it is. It's probably about 20 years I bought it. But it's there's a Tintin shop in York, which is fantastic. And they have all the figures and the posters and then mouse pads and all that because it's so collectible, obviously. But I noticed actually when you go on eBay, because I was looking occasionally. Occasionally, I go on eBay. I live on eBay, for God's sake. But one of the big Tintin collectibles that's always on there are the cars. So they've got things like that as a collectible. Basically, the cars, the bikes, and they've always got a figurine hanging off them with a gun. And it's because Hergé, he lovingly sort of redrew these cars from the 30s and 40s. And in this book is when he first really started doing that, I think. And it begins that obsession with these accurate depictions of real life vehicles and stuff. I mean, this is just beautiful. The artwork in this one is absolutely beautiful.
I think the thing that strikes me looking back at this now, thinking that this is from 1931, we're talking about the early days of comic strips and really the cartoonists developing a visual language. You know, when I first started reading Tintin books, I remember not really knowing how to read a cartoon book, you know, that I was going sort of left to right. But if there were lots of bubbles, speech bubbles in a particular
Yeah.
frame, then I'd be sort of looking, well, do I go left to right or do I go up and down? Or do
Yeah.
so,
Bottom,
and
isn't it?
I think he kind of starts playing with that. There's a lot of words in here, but there's also a lot of visual storytelling. So on page 7, I really like this at the top here. There's a frame there with a guy sort of throwing a vase at someone coming through the door, and
Oh
like
yeah.
the one of them's got a question mark over his head, and Tintin's being hit in the face, and he's got stars coming out of his head. The other guy's all told without a single word.
Yeah.
And I just think that on the one hand, you've got these very wordy frames in here, but then you've got this really beautiful visual storytelling.
Yeah, that's very clever, that frame, isn't it? Because it's like, yeah, Tintin's been hit with the door, Snowy's reacting, the guy coming in has got a, is it Al Capone? He's got a vase in the face, the guy who's throwing it's like, oh well, that went wrong. Yeah, it's fantastic. In fact, the fights in Tintin have always been fantastic. I always love later on that, you know, when people crash into things, it always looks like they've really hurt themselves. They always have like stars coming out of them and, you know, crunching into each other. And I know Haddock, obviously, when he falls over a lot and hits things, you really get the sense that he's absolutely dented his head.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, as well as the Harold Lloyd thing, there are other frames that are drawn from other sources. I think I'm particularly thinking about the work of Arthur Conan Doyle again, because there's the scene where the train he sort of commandeers a train to chase the
Yeah,
baddie who's getting away.
yeah, I love that.
And that's really out of, I think that was out of one of the Sherlock Holmes things where Moriarty commandeers a train to go after Sherlock Holmes and Watson, and um, and then there's this other scene as well where there's a dummy that Tintin puts in the window that gets riddled with bullets because obviously there's this sort of sniper opposite
Yeah,
trying to kill him, and again that's straight out of a Sherlock. Actually, I think the same Sherlock Holmes story.
really.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. And I also John Buchan as well and 39 Steps. Anything with train people jumping off train into. I think actually it might be in Black Island. He jumps off a train into the river. I could be wrong, but I think there's a chase alongside of a train, and Tintin jumps off, and this guy like, oh well, he must be drowned. You know, he jumped off the bridge into the river. It's just that escape. But also Hergé obviously read a lot and watched a lot of movies and read a lot of books because there's so many recognizable scenarios. You know, almost like a sort of best of these adventures. You know, boys' own adventures. Yeah, he's a bit of a Boy Scout. He's a bit of a detective. He's intrepid. He's a reporter. You know, it's just got all these elements of fun that Tintin basically can get involved in any scenario, and because he's an action hero, you know, you don't think of Tintin as an action hero. You think him as just he's a boy. He's a boy reporter, but he is as intrepid as like Indiana Jones or something. He's always in fights. He's always chasing the bad guy. He said, I'm going to bring Al Capone down, you know, all this kind of stuff.
Well, he's going up against quite a cast of characters, and there are some quite memorable
Yes.
characters in this book. I like Bobby Smiles, the
I love
gangster.
Bobby Smiles. He's such a sleazy git. Yeah.
And it's interesting that even though Hergé is trying to show the plight of the Native Americans in a sympathetic light,
Yeah.
they're not really characters that are sympathetic to Tintin. Bobby Smiles again is able to go to the Native Americans and sort of sell them this line that
Yeah.
Tintin is the baddie who's out to get them and turn them against Tintin. So it's not as though Tintin's befriending the Native Americans or anything.
Yeah, the pale face, aren't they? But again, it's the very Hitchcockian, the man, the mistaken identity of the man. Like, you know, that guy nicks Tintin's shoes, and then Tintin gets mistaken for the bank robber because he's wearing the bank robber's shoes. Um,
Yeah. Some of it is some of it's very kind of Wile E. Coyote as well. Some of the sort of canyon kind of capers that go on. And Wile E. Coyote I don't think came on for another like 15 or 20 years after this.
yeah, no, I was thinking, especially this kind of stuff with Wile E. Coyote. You know, I mean,
Totally.
that could be straight out of Roadrunner, and I actually love the Roadrunner cartoons because I love the world they're created. It's like there's certain. Did you ever see Chuck Jones's Rules of the Roadrunner cartoon?
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Brilliant. It's like a list of 12 rules to do with things that can and cannot happen. And it's like, he never catches the Roadrunner. He never falls off a cliff until he realizes he's falling off the cliff. Acme products never work. They always work against the person who's, using them. So yeah, there is a real sense of that's the thing. That's the thing about Tintin. It's a cartoon. He can suddenly he's in a cartoon. He's falling off cliffs. He's discovering caves full of treasure. He's getting shot in the air by an oil geezer. It's funny, but it's also just high adventure. And it's way better than a lot of movies that try and do this kind of stuff.
I mean, it's introducing the readership to a whole new world, really. The readers of this would probably never have been to the United States, and I mean, again, political overtones. They're obviously trying to make a message. There's the whole thing about when the oil well is discovered.
I'm just on the page
Tintin,
now.
yeah, they think it's Tintin who's found it, so they're offering him tens of thousands of dollars for this.
Yeah.
And then when they found out it's the Native Americans who it's on their land, that they get offered about $25 and then just get moved on.
I know that's a brilliant bit of satire. That they're offering him like this guy's like 50 G's, 100 G's. Oh no, this belongs to the people the Blackfoot Indians who live in this part of the country. Yeah, the next thing is $25 and half an hour to pack your bags and quit the territory, he says to the Indian chief. And then it's like an hour later, in come the army. 2 hours later, construction. 3 hours later, they're building a bank. The next morning, there's a whole city there. I mean, it's broad satire. It's almost like a Mel Brooks kind of thing, but brilliant, absolutely brilliant bit of that sledgehammer satire there of how America was founded.
He also in a lot of the later frames of the cartoon, he puts like advertising. Hergé's obviously been told that the Americans are just mad on advertising, and
Yeah,
as Tintin's sort of walking through the nature, he's getting all of these billboards and advertisements and things like that. Actually, to us in a modern audience, it doesn't look too bad, but back in the day, it must have looked like, oh, there's advertising on everything.
I know, and it wasn't even that bad then. I love it. I love the plant he goes to where they push him in. They put the oily guy who meets him at the grind plant, which is a great name, pushes him into the corned beef machine, and then afterwards goes, "Oh my God, what a terrible accident!" It's like, my God, he turned up to this meeting and he nearly got turned into corned beef.
And there's this sort of perturbed looking cow looking over, and again, it's this commentary on mechanization and the heartlessness of the industry. But again,
Yeah.
a big departure from Tintin in the Congo, where it's very much about animals being shot in the sort of safari.
Yeah, whereas I love the fact that on the last frame of that, the oil page, where it's going, so a copper just goes to Tintin, who's dressed as a cowboy now, just goes, "Where do you think you are, the Wild West or something?" And it's like, but yesterday this was the Wild West. I mean, again, it's just this microcosm of how the white man has destroyed the natural world. That's still, sadly, it's a very modern sensibility now. We're all very aware of it, whereas in those days it's probably quite ahead of its time.
Yes.
Not to the Native Americans, obviously, because they've been through it. So they were like, we used to own this land until the white man said we don't own it. But it's again, like Tintin and the Land of the Soviets, there's so many adventures, but it's just so zippy this time. It doesn't feel fractious. It feels fractured. It feels there's a story and it moves really fast. So before you know it, you're at the end. One of my favorite bits is when he's being chased by the copper because he's chasing after Snowy, who's been kidnapped, and he runs under an armorer called the Sword of Damocles armorer, and the sword falls on his head. Again, it's just really good, witty, funny moments. And Tintin basically is misunderstood throughout this entire episode. He's captured about 7 times by the police until they're like, "What's your name?" "Oh, it's Tintin." And they're like, "Oh, sorry."
There's so much in there. It's he packs so much in, and like meaty stuff with kind of interesting messages as well.
Yeah.
And there's this story running through it all as well, which is great. But I think my favorite character, which I hadn't really even registered this character before. Mike McAdam, hotel detective.
Yes, now he's interesting because he feels like a precursor to someone else.
Well, I was going to say Jolien Wag.
Right, Jolien Wag, yes. But yes, he is more like him, isn't it? I was thinking he is a bit like he's a bit like the Thompson twins because he's a
Oh, yes, yeah, absolutely,
I
yeah, absolutely, like the Thompson twins as well.
mean, the Thompson twins are crap detectives. And this guy, I love the fact that he comes in, yeah, and he's just like, he gives it Tintin a million facts on as to why, who's kidnapped this dog.
It's taking the master detective, the Sherlock Holmes thing, and kind of turning it on his head. He's sort of
Yeah,
saying, your dog's abductor wears sock garters which match his flannel underwear, and his grandfather was scalped 40 years ago by a Sioux, and obviously he's a complete charlatan, but yeah, he's a wonderful character.
he's brilliant. Actually, he turns up with this with a Dachshund, doesn't he? He goes, "Here you go, found your dog," and he just went out and nicked it off an old lady. So he's a complete fraud. Um,
There's another character which I wondered if this is somebody we're going to see again in a Tintin book. This is on page 57. And just at the bottom, where Tintin's having his thank you dinner for saving the world, just to the right of him there, that looks very much like Rastapopoulos.
oh, the chap with the cigarette and the bald head. It does look like Rastapopoulos, actually. I like the fact that Bobby Smiles just says Alcatraz all the time as well. That's his catchphrase, isn't it? Alcatraz. That's his. When every time he sees Tintin, he's like Alcatraz. um, he's a very memorable character, and again, I don't think he pops up again. But there are characters like Bobby Smiles in the future. Yeah, they're a memorable bunch of hoodlums.
There's a slightly weird one, again, having said that Hergé was getting it all right this time. Because this book was first published in black and white, and I think then there were about 10 or 11 different versions of it between 1931 and 45. They kind
Yeah,
of kept redrawing things. And
yeah,
but in the colorized version here, Tintin is dunked in the river with a weight around his ankle
yeah.
by two American-looking gangsters. But in the original black and white, again, it's by some Chinese-looking, slightly dodgy characters as well. So that again, that's something that has seems to have been changed in the intervening years.
Actually, I know that he redrew a lot of his early ones to fit in. There was the line. What's the art technique called? Something line, clear line, or something. But basically, what ended up being the Hergé Tintin style, because the first few weren't like that. So I know he redrew a lot of plates and a lot of books until he found the style. Because later on, obviously, he set upon this classic Tintin style, and they were all like that from that point on. But I really like Tintin's outfit in this when he's dressed as a cowboy. It's one of the only ones where he doesn't go around in blue four. All
Yeah, this is my wonderful mug here, and I was reading something by Hergé the other day. I think it was in his later life. He was complaining about what a hard job he had, basically, and he was saying, you don't realize I have to be a researcher, set designer, costume designer for all of these books, and it is absolutely true that he goes to a big lengths to get the costumes right, to draw these characters. Now, particularly in this book, you start to see these new characters emerging and really strong characters. I mean, there are a few frames in here, like the vertigo one on the outside of the building, and the trains tracing each other, where you get the lines in the black and white version that really give you a sense of speed and movement. And then you get the lighting from on some of the campfire scenes as well, which are just works of art, really.
yeah.
We should think about the seven crystal balls scale. What are you going to be giving Tintin in America?
I don't want to jump the gun too much at this
Mm.
early stage because we're on book 3, but I would give this 5 crystal balls because it's a classic one. And it's the first sort of genius level one, even though I love the first two because they're the first two.
I like your thinking. I was going to give this 5 as well, and
Yeah,
I'm conscious that it was redrawn and rewritten quite a lot, probably between 1931 and 1945. So Hergé has sort of patched it up as he went, but it's a really strong story. It
yeah.
crosses east to west and back again, the North America, and it just brings in so many ideas.
Yeah, and also it's very fun. It's a fun one. It's colorful. It's lively. It's just really fun. It's memorable. There's loads of bits that you think are great, and It's Tintin is here. You know, we're off. This is a complete book.
So to set the scene for next time,
Mhm.
so what happens at the end of this book in autumn 1932? The serialization comes to an end. A third homecoming event is organized by Hergé's boss, Valet, and it's the biggest yet, returning to Brussels. Tintin and Snowy, again, an actor playing Tintin. Um, and at this stage, a former colleague of Hergé has recently moved to Casterman Publishing House, and he introduces Hergé to the boss of Casterman. And Casterman actually becomes the official publisher of the Tintin books from then on, and that's a relationship that continues throughout Hergé's life. A lot is changing for Hergé. He gets engaged in February 1932 to Jermaine Keekins,
Yeah.
and he gets married in the July, just as the serialization is coming to an end. And Valet, his boss, officiates at the wedding as a Catholic priest. Although he seems to make them work late the night before, so he's sort of got. He's also a proprietor of a newspaper, of course. We have to remember that.
Okay.
So the happy couple go off to honeymoon in Luxembourg. Hergé is drawing lots of pictures of Germaine at this stage, lots of artwork being produced. And then they move into an apartment in the outskirts of Brussels together with their Siamese cat. And it all seems to be pretty happy.
It's not as straightforward, is it, as we think?
Well, we will come to that. So tell me, what's our next book?
Is it Cigars of the Pharaoh?
That's right.
It is, isn't it? Because I've got it's funny because on the back of the English ones they used to put Blue Lotus up there and the Incas one there, and then all these here, and I'm like, okay, well that's technically not the right order because Blue Lotus comes soon. But Cigars of the Pharaoh is the next one, which is it's a very memorable one for me. I remember loving this one because it's very The Mummy. It's there's a mystery, a sort of mystical mystery. It's an archaeological sort of mystery. It's just like, yeah, what are these cigars? Why does a pharaoh have cigars? There's these boxes, and there's this sort of there's an intrigue with a Tintin has to go on this big boat and all this. So it's this great voyage. And again, I haven't read it for years, so I'm going to read it this week and see if I remember it well. I remember it being one of my favorite ones.
Fantastic. Well, I'm looking forward to it. Well,
Yeah.
do feel free to write in and correct us where we have made mistakes, as I'm sure we have. But we will see you next week for Cigars of the Pharaohs.
Can't wait.
Bye-bye.
Bye.